Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Laurence. I'm a PhD student in a project called The True Cost of Food in Switzerland. And it's a project that we have worked on at E4S for a few years now, and it has now become an interdisciplinary project with 6 Swiss institutions working on the topic. And well, today I'm representing this consortium. And I will try today to lead you to think about pathways or narratives that can help us shape more resilient, more sustainable, more fair food systems. And as it's today's topic, I will try to throw a sufficiency lens to it. And I hope that at the end of my talk, you won't think about sufficiency for food as the image on the left, but rather as the image on the right. So I will briefly go over the main challenges that we are facing, that food systems are facing, going on the 3 dimensions that are here: environmental, social, and health. And then I will go on the pathways for change. So on the environmental side, here we have an image of the planetary boundaries, and the black dots represent the part of agricultural production in these planetary boundaries. So you see that it's massive. And if we continue business as usual, this proportion of impacts that is attributed to food systems will double by 2050. So in a way, if we want to stay within planetary boundaries, there's no way we will do it without changing the way we produce and we consume food. But that's not the entire side of the story of agricultural production. We have seen last year massive protests from farmers in Europe and in Switzerland that basically were saying we don't accept this pressure of having to produce more with producing more with making less impacts in a context where there's increasing shocks, and in that getting always a smaller proportion of the pie. And I think this shows a bit a social contract that has been broken, or that is broken, between food producers and food consumers. An interesting study that was done by colleagues at the University of Lausanne, it's in French, but basically what it's saying is that in many value chains in Switzerland, the producers do not receive a price that covers their production costs. So basically the subsidies that once were designed to foster and to encourage certain environmental practices or certain practices for food production now become a main pillar of the wages of farmers. So we see also that we come to an end of how this system that we created. And so now I talked briefly about the production side, but what about the right. Now this also a zoom out on food production more globally, going out of this European and context. I think we heard just before about how the global rule of markets can create huge inequalities, and global value chains are places where important inequalities take place with many hard work for very little remuneration in return. So now, going on the food consumption side, I thought that I changed this image yesterday, but I will explain them. So this is on the consumption side, and these numbers that you see not so properly are the percentage of deaths that are attributed to unhealthy diets or dietary risks. So we have 22% of global deaths that can be attributed to unhealthy diets. This is massive. And on the right side, it's the disabled adjusted life years. So it's the numbers of years that you live without being fully healthy. And 15% of them can be attributed to dietary risk or unhealthy diets. So this global picture shows both, on the one side, the 2 billion people that are overweight, and the 820 million people facing hunger every day. And we know that we produce sufficiently, not exactly in the right proportion to all have a healthy diet, but basically we could all live out or having enough kilocalories, and that's not groundbreaking news, but it's a question of sharing, of distribution. Thank you. And an interesting study that was also issued a few weeks back, was on the French food system, and what they could assess is that above 5 billion euros were invested every year in marketing and advertisement for food. And they could also say that more than half of them were directed towards unhealthy food. So there's massive investments also in shaping our consumers, our behavior. And comparing the number on the right, it's just like the costs that are attributed to unhealthy diets in France. So how to move forward with this daunting picture that I just portrayed? Well, one very important contribution that has been done in the last years is the Eat Lancet Commission. It's the first systemic studies that has linked both on the one side the production, so planetary boundaries, and the consumption, so our health. And basically what they say is pretty positive. So if we eat more healthily, we create less impacts on the planet. And if we look at this picture, this is a diet that if we would all more or less eat in such a way, so such a plate, and half our food waste and loss, we would manage to remain within planetary boundary by 2050, also with the population growth. So that's a very positive narrative that we can use. And where is sufficiency in that? Well, I would say that sufficiency can lead us move from a very quantitative mindset that have shaped our food systems globally these last years. So we were thinking in terms of kilocalories, in terms of yields per hectare, but not really in terms of quality, of diversity, of the different elements that I told you before. And of course, another narrative that is being widespread in food systems are the hidden costs or the true costs, and that's where our project comes in. So we are doing what is on this image, but for the Swiss context. Here it's the numbers for globally. It's the Food and Agriculture Organization that issued these numbers. And what we see is in gray, it's the money that we invest in food every year, that people pay globally for food. And in the three colors that represent the three dimensions that I talked about earlier, so environmental, health, and social ones, these are hidden costs that are in the system that we don't pay or that we pay but just elsewhere. So we see that there is massive cost in health, for example, and that's costs that we pay as society, but we don't pay them when we have to buy food and we don't have these incentives. And so basically what this picture shows is that when we pay a food, for example, 1 franc, then there's 1 franc elsewhere that is not being paid for the impact it creates, or that it's being paid but elsewhere. And for me, this methodology is not perfect, it has its limitation, but what it allows us to do is to think about what hides behind our production and consumption system. And I think it can help us value things differently. So when we talk about food, what is actually the true value of sharing a good meal with friends, with family? What is the true value of living healthily thanks to our diets? What is the true value of having beautiful, diverse landscapes and of knowing that the farmers, the producers in these landscapes are paid enough and that their children don't want to flee to cities? So Basically, for me, sufficiency, it helps us reconsider our value systems, and from a rather one-dimensional view, and that has created the problems, to more the values that we need to shape the future. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We do have a couple of questions here that we are aiming to respond in less than 3 minutes. So let's see how we go about it. What is on top percentage? No, what is the top percentage of raw material lost during the transformation of food?
So in total, we have 30% of food waste and loss. So what we produce, we lose 30%. And if I'm not mistaken, 30% of these 30% are done by consumers. So the rest is before in the supply chain. So when we have certain standards, then we discredit like some apples that are not on the right size, etc. So it's 70-30 of the 30 that we lose.
All right, which is a bit similar to what I was saying at the beginning. 1/3 of all food we produce is wasted. Exactly. But what about the rest of the material that we are using to produce the foods? I mean, are we wasting maybe more water?
Well, yes, there is massive investment to be done in certain places to manage water as a very scarce resource, because it is a very scarce resource and it will become even more so in the future. So yes, I mean, there is a lot of good practices. We see, for example, agroecology has a lot of different ways of, or techniques that help produce in a more sustainable way.
There's another question here in regards to sufficiency in the food sector. Is there a place for luxury foods, for example, chocolate produced in poor countries and then consumed in richer countries? Not sure exactly what the angle of this question is, but I would guess, you know, it's produced in poorer countries, and then it needs to take planes and travel elsewhere to all over the world to be consumed in there. So how can we be sufficient in producing locally?
That's a very tricky question. There's a lot of debate about this question, actually, because the locality of food, sometimes it's, when you look only at environmental impacts, it's better to import, not by plane, never by plane, but by other ways than to produce locally. But in general, for example, the chocolate, I would say that it's more like new business models that allow us to have less inequalities within the chain and more empowerment a little bit of the farmers. For example, there is last year we had this person from Choba Choba that came, and what they are proposing is that farmers are directly they have a share in the business, and so they decide the price to which the chocolate is sold. They decide about how the chocolate looks like, and they have like more, a stronger voice in our consumption also here.
Okay, well, thank you so much.